Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. As always, my name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Donald Knight. He's the Chief People Officer of Greenhouse. Donald, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Greenhouse actually does?
Gleb, first, thanks for having me. It's not every day I get to, talk to a doctor of your standards. So this is going to be fun. Greenhouse, look, we help people hire for what's next, helping people unlock human potential. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to be able to give their potential to so many different organizations and park their time, talent, and treasure. And we believe a structured interview process with some amazing hiring software allows people to figure out where are those organizations that they want to spend their time. So yeah, that's Greenhouse in a nutshell. And when I'm not doing that, I'm eating ice cream. I love
Excellent. I love ice cream too. All right. And Halo Top is my favorite brand, by the way.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Yeah, not in any way affiliated with it. But moving on to hybrid work. So you've put out a report showing that a number of things, but one of the headline numbers is that 76% of respondents would be quite open, ready to walk, looking for another job if their hybrid work opportunity, if their flexible work opportunity was taken away. Can you tell me a little bit more about that finding and why you think people are just so willing and passionate about having at least some flexibility in their work time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I think the reality is the pandemic accelerated this opportunity for folks to reimagine work and reimagine this social contract between employees and employers. And so as a result, what we have found is that for the most part, most companies were able to be more productive. In the heart of the pandemic, we actually saw revenues soaring to new heights. And what that proved is that the flexibility that employees were able to gain by not having to commute into a physical location every day, or the flexibility that one has and when they even start their day or even in their day, has proven to be a perk that employees want to have moving forward. And so this idea that organizations, companies would seek to roll that back and remove some of the flexibility that employees have been able to experience. Well, I think for many people, what they're saying in our survey is that that's a non-starter. That's where they'll start to look for new opportunities that do allow them the opportunity to still be fulfilled in what they do every day, but do so in more of a flexible manner.
So that's interesting that you talked about productivity, because we clearly see starting from 2022, the beginning of 2022, there was a drop in productivity for the last 5-6 quarters. And that's associated with the time that companies are asking their employees to come to the office. So associated with the drop in productivity and also associated with the Great Resignation, where people are leaving companies at greater numbers for those that asking them to return to the office. In fact, there was another research by Unispace survey that found that 46% of companies that had back to office mandates were surprised by how large their attrition was as a result of the return to office mandate. So given these numbers with productivity dropping, with attrition, why do you think companies are still rolling back that flexibility perk that employees so value, and that seems to actually be making companies more productive?
Yeah, I think there's three major things that I would say that's probably contributing to this unfortunate reality, but I understand it. I think number one, there's plenty of business leaders and entrepreneurs that have proven to be super successful in the past, that they have never seen their success created where people were not in the office, right? Probably the biggest example of this is Elon Musk, who has built numerous businesses that are super successful, but the kind of collaboration that he's been able to thrive upon and capitalize on is when people have a physical proximity to one another. And so to go to that type of a leader and say, hey, we're going to roll back the amount of opportunities for folks to have that level of collaboration, that just seems very difficult for one to have to grapple with when there's so many different data sets and data points that says through his tenure, through his leadership, where there's been some success. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one is when you think about this idea of like the technology revolution, whether you're thinking about the internet or even now, so many folks are talking about AI and what does that look like as it relates to being a tool for humans inside of the workplace. I think there's another group of leaders that are just like, I don't want to be the early adopter in crossing that chasm. They want to see other companies be able to prove out what are the best practices, what are the things that are going to allow a multinational organization with a global footprint. What does that look like for them? What does that look like culturally? And so there's some people that are just hesitant by nature. Their leadership style is, listen, we're not going to be the first one or the early adopters to cross that chasm, which again, I totally understand both of those groups. I do believe, however, there's a third group as well, which they're not open to anything different. They did not enjoy their time spent being productive in the home. And for those people, they may find it more compelling to be in a physical environment with less flexibility because that's where they were able to be successful. Now, here's the thing about all three of those, Gleb. Like, personally, I actually understand all three of them, although I don't have that same mentality. I try to understand where people are coming from and assume good intent. Yeah. So I understand where they're coming from. I think equally at the same time, I'm reminded of my favorite teacher in elementary school, Miss Derricott. And what I really appreciated about her, Gleb, was that her teaching style matched my learning style. So my parents were wondering, like, why was I thriving so much in her class and getting like an A+, and in all my other classes, I was getting like low A's, high B's, and they just couldn't understand. And I was like, no, like her teaching style matches my learning style. The way she teaches, it's easier for me to grasp the information. And I think the same thing is going to be true for how people are productive moving forward. Regardless of where those leaders fall in those buckets, there's a whole group, there's a whole generation, there's a whole consensus of people that actually are more productive. They're more fulfilled working with greater flexibility. Those companies and those leaders have to find a way to be able to flex their leadership style, flex their teaching style for those types of employees, for those types of learners, for those types of potential candidates. And if they choose not to, unfortunately, what it means is that the candidate pool that they're going to be able to pull from, the talent pool they're going to be able to attract, is going to be a lot smaller if they're not willing to be as flexible.
That makes a lot of sense, but I want to add a fourth group. So I was talking to the CHRO of a major retail brand. We're talking about hybrid work and kind of what she was going on in her company. And she told me that she was talking to another CHRO of another major company, again, names you both know, of both companies. And that company decided to return to the office in part because that would force some resignations and cut their workforce in a time of economic turmoil, challenge, whatever. And so I wouldn't assume positive intentions for everyone. Clearly, that's a fourth group that may not have such positive intentions in forcing employees back to the office, just to note that. So positive intentions may be an assumption, but not always is that the actual reasoning. Now, I'm curious, you're talking about different employees, different learners of different learning style, different employees of different styles. But when we actually look at the research, we have something like maybe 15% of people, 20% of people who want to work full-time in the office. I mean, your own survey found that 76% of people would be looking for another job, open to not being headhunted, if their company rolled back flexibility. So clearly, I mean, if you're thinking of 76% as one type of employee learning style, maybe there's not that many learning styles / employee styles there, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think there's also a shift that's happening inside of the workplace where the population of eligible workers is changing dramatically, right? So you saw a lot of conversations on boomers, on Gen X, on millennials, on Gen Z, on Gen Alpha, and their percentage of representation in the workplace is shifting. And so I think as you continue to see generations that literally went to formal education, university, and they were in a hybrid environment, they're not expecting that flexibility to go away just because they choose to take a full-time role at an organization. I think equally at the same time, though, I want to be mindful that people define flexible very different. And I'll give you an example. People with disabilities have told companies for years that they can do these roles from home. And companies said no. They weren't willing to make the accommodations. Most companies said no. And in the middle of the pandemic, or when the pandemic kicked off, we actually saw able-bodied people be forced to work from home, which then opened up all of these opportunities and possibilities for where you can have remote, distributed, or hybrid work. And so I bring that to your attention because those folks were asking for flexibilities for years, decades, and did not see it. So how you define flexible is also going to be very interesting, which is why I think the key word in flexible, in my opinion, is flex. You have to be able to flex your leadership style, flex your policy, flex your leniency to be able to attract the type of talent you want. And so for me, that means, I have folks that work for my team specifically that are based in Dublin, Ireland. And equally at the same time, I have people that are based in San Francisco. And so I don't force everybody to join at the exact same time and you have to work from these hours. Flexibility for those individuals are like, hey, as long as team meetings are doing the core hours where we can work across time zones and co-collaborate, or be able to co-create together, this idea that we can do updates async, that's the flexibility that they're looking for. They're not looking to be mandated that you have to work at 8 a.m. starting East Coast time or starting West Coast time. So I think companies have to do a good job trying to figure out what does flexible mean in their organization and be mindful that there's varying perspectives on what that is, and hopefully try to live up to that expectation as much as possible in order to be able to retain the top talent that they have in their organization.
Yeah, that's definitely conversations that I have with my clients. I have 24 companies by now transition to figuring out their future work policies, and thinking about flexibility is key. And the question that I have them ask always at the start of the conversation is, what is the office for anyway? Like, why do you want people to come to the office? I think there's just a presumption. I see so many wars. I mean, is it 3 days in the office? Is it 2 days? Is it 1 day? But really starting with what is the office for? And inevitably, the office is very clearly not for individual work, because individual work can be much more productively done at home for the large majority of people. You do your programming, you do your design, you do your head down work, your writing, you do your emails, your asynchronous communication, your Teams messages, you do your video conference calls. That's much easier done from home than from the office. The office is for very important activities, for more intense synchronous collaboration, for on-the-job training, mentoring others, for nuanced conversations like about performance, conflict, strategic conversations, for various forms of socializing, team bonding. Those are very high stakes, high value activities, but for most employees, that's less than 20% of their time. So that's what they should be spending in the office doing, which is going to be 1 to 2 days a week in the office, but the lead number should not be how much days that you're spending in the office. It's what are you actually doing in the office?
I totally agree with you. Yeah. So often we're seeing people go into their offices and unfortunately then being on Zoom calls or Google Meet calls all day, or Microsoft Teams calls all day. And that's not the highest and best use of people's time, right? So, I've kind of started to shift this thought process. And for me, we'll see, this might be a little controversial, but this is the Dr. G show. So I feel kind of comfortable. I believe what we're going to see in the evolution of the physical workplace is that it's going to serve as a social hub, very similar to universities, where people can gather and commune with one another. And when there's times to do ideation, when there's time to do collaboration or co-create, those types of physical spaces will likely be huge in the impact that it creates in order to have people be able to work more closely together. And I think equally at the same time, this idea that will be the only place where leaders identify where people on their teams are being productive, where I think those days will continue to be more sunset. So I think it's going to serve as a great social hub for cross collaboration, especially cross functionally, and gone will be the days where you see the marketing team only sitting with the marketing team, people team only with the people team. It's like, no, when you come to the office, this is going to be a place where people can commune. So I'm hoping that's where we're seeing this potential shift or pivot in the workplace.
I'm hoping so too. I think that's a great vision of the future. And it's a great point in which to wrap up. Are there any other last thoughts with which you wish to leave our audience, Tom?
Look, I think the one thing I would just encourage, I know so many leaders that are listening to your platform and listening right now to our conversation and maybe wondering, hey, where do I start? If I want to be flexible, how do I do it? And so the way that I tell people is like, look at your policies, go back and look at the rules of engagement and see if there's ways to make some potential tweaks given the new landscape. I'll raise my hand and say, like, we had a bereavement policy that was a decade old, and so many things have changed in that decade. So is this an opportunity for us to do a refresh, for us to, dust some of the cobwebs off of some of these policies and try to determine, are they creating the entire environment and creating the type of impact for the talent at our organization that we want them to have? And in those cases where they're not, be open about why we're making said shifts for folks to be able to understand that. I think that's the biggest thing I would leave people with on the flexible side. And then on the candidate side, the last thing I would leave you with is they are watching. I recognize some, economic hard times and headwinds are cyclical, but there will be a time where this thing called the planet and the economic engine globally will be roaring at a different tune than it is today. And when that happens, you want talent to look back at how companies are navigating these times to better determine where they want to park their time, talent, and treasure. So be very intentional on the candidate experience that you have. Like if you start out talking to an amazing talent and you're encouraging them and they navigate through the interview process, but they get to the end of your process and they don't know where they stand, that's not good enough. You have to be willing to make both the first and the last impression. So I hope people are going to seize this moment to really lean into living out the values that they have and living up to the employer brand that they are showcasing on full display in shared spaces. That would be the last two things I share.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Donald. That was very helpful and inspirational. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show and it helps us improve the show. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.